Welcome everybody, and thanks for joining us once again for our Royal Sydney Yacht Squadron North Sails webinar. And thank you for joining us, but also a really big thank you to Andrew Parks and Albie Pratt for taking the time to put this together for us. Today we're going to talk about Spinnaker trim, and I'll hand over to Andrew.
Thanks very much, Karen, and welcome everyone. It's nice to see so many familiar faces have joined us, and it's great that you could all take the time. Today we're going to talk about Spinnaker trim, and I got a couple of messages last week asking if we'd talk about asymmetric sails as well, and we'll be covering that next week. So if you're sailing a sprit boat, don't worry, there'll be a little bit of info for you next week. So look, there's this is not as structured as the previous ones, so I'm going to ad-lib a little bit, but let's just start with the basics. So with symmetric Spinnaker trim, we just want to concentrate on the initial trim, and this is the basis for whatever you do, and then we can elaborate from there. So looking at your initial Spinnaker trim, there are a couple of really basic things. You want to set the pole perpendicular to the wind. You want to try and aim to have the two clews even, and you want to adjust the sheet. That's our source of trimming the sail. So we're going to go on to downwind running trim at the moment, and then we'll go on to reaching. So in light air, we sail different angles to heavy air, obviously, and we're sailing from anything from about 90 true down to 180 true. So for our light air Spinnaker trim, we start with our initial trim, which is the most important thing, and I think this holds true in all wind conditions. You need to sail the correct angle for the wind. You've got to sail a higher angle or a hotter angle in light air to keep pressure in the Spinnaker and keep pressure in the boat. And then as the breeze increases, we can run deeper, we can bring the pole back and sail closer to dead downwind. But sailing the proper angle is the key. And this is really important interaction between the trimmer and the helmsperson. It's not just about the driver, you've got to work together. So we want to sail our proper angle for the current wind, get the pole perpendicular to the breeze, keep your clews even and play the sheet. Now our proper true wind angles in light air are anywhere from, as I said, maybe 90 to 140 true. But you've just got to sail depending on the pressure. The big variable is speed, and the optimum boat speed changes with the wind speed up until when you reach hull speed. So you've got to keep taking the boat up when it's light, come down when there's pressure, and feel the boat. And it's something you just have to work hard at. And if you work hard at it, the dividends are well worth the effort. So in light air, we're looking at no deeper than 140 true wind angle. If you get deeper than that, you'll feel the Spinnaker will get soggy, the load will come out of the sheet, the clue will drop. So you just need to keep working on those wind angles and the pressure in the boat. So from our initial starting point of the breeze, the pole being perpendicular to the wind, we actually want to over square the pole slightly. And what we're trying to do with that is a couple of things. First of all, we want the luff to fly vertically off the pole, or as close to vertical as we can. And secondly, we want to get the sail to be a little bit flatter. And we want the foot shape to be similar to the mid shape of the sail. So if we look at our diagrams here, on the left, you can see that the pole is further forward, and you can see how deep the sail is sectionally through the middle and in the foot. You can see how round it all is. In the diagram on the right, we can see that we've got the pole further back and the sail is flatter. It's flatter across the centre, it's flatter across the foot, and that's giving us a much better projected area. So again, if we look at the diagram on the left, you can see the clue leaves the pole and is actually, the luff's going out to windward. That's not optimal. In the right-hand diagram, we can see that we've got the pole further aft. The luff is flying more vertically off the pole, and the sail is presenting flatter. So we're getting a better projected shape. And something that people sort of forget with Spinnakers is the wind doesn't just blow from behind and push you along. The wind has to flow around the sail. It's still a sail, it has to have flow. So if we have the sail too deep, as we've discussed previously, if the sail's too deep, we don't get flow, the sail stalls. So we're trying to get the sail to be more efficient. If you look at these photographs now, and this is the same boat in both photos. The photo on the left, you can see the pole is further forward. You can see how round the foot of the sail is. And also the luff is coming, diagonally off the end of the pole. In the right-hand photo, the pole is further aft. The sail is flatter, and you can see that the luff is more vertical. So with our pole height, again, we want to start with our clews being even, and then we want to have the pole a little bit lower on the tack end, because we want to try and open the leach up and help the sail get more flow across it. Obviously, with the clew at the same height or lower than the tack, it's going to close the leach up. So we're trying to actually induce a bit of twist in the sail, which is what we discussed previously in other sessions. So if we look at this photo of a FAR 30, you can see that the Spinnaker is quite vertical on the luff. The pole is a nice height. And then if we look behind the upper leach of the mainsail, you can see that the leach has got a nice open profile. That's a pretty nice setup, and they're doing a good job there. So when it comes to trimming, we want to ease the sheet until the luff starts to curl. I'm sure you've all seen it. And we want to be aggressive with the ease because we don't want the sail to stall. We're trying to keep the trim quite active. We want to keep easing until we get a curl on the luff, then trim back on again. Just keep moving that sheet all the time. And again, as I discussed at the start, we're trying to keep pressure in the sheet. And if you're not familiar with what I'm talking about, when you're sailing, if we sail too low in light winds, we don't have any tension or pressure in the Spinnaker sheet. And the trimmer should be able to feel that when they're holding the sheet. If it's light wind, you might only have half a turn or one turn on the winch, if your boat has winches. And if you can't feel the sheet pulling, try and take a turn off the winch, because unless you can feel the tension, you're not going to be able to give the helms person really good feedback. So we're trying to maintain the pressure. The other telltale sign is if you see the clew of the Spinnaker start to drop or sag, that's another indicator that there's not enough pressure in the sail, and you need to heat up and sail a little bit hotter. So if we look at this photo here, this is a pretty nice setup, for downwind. We can see that the luff is presenting really nicely. The pole is slightly lower, and the tack is a little bit lower than the clew. All in all, it looks really nice. But being objective about it all, the crew weight's a long way aft, and they do better if they've got a few people out of the cockpit to get the stern out of the water a bit and minimise the drag. And also, if we look at the mainsail, it's quite closed on the leach. So a little bit less vang here would help, because that would actually set the mainsail up a little bit more nicely. So don't forget, it's not always just about the Spinnaker. We've got to trim the other sails and trim the boat. And we'll talk about trimming the boat a little bit further in the presentation. So, as I said, we're trying to steer to maintain pressure and speed. We want to come up to put load in the boat. And when we've got pressure in the sheet and we can feel the boat heeling, we need to come down again. And this is always changing. You can't just aim at the mark and hang on. You've got to keep working together, talking about the pressure, have someone with their head out of the boat, calling the breeze. And you're really doing this, up and down through a pretty small, range of angles in light air. And try and be smooth. Smooth is the key. Don't be jerky. Don't turn the boat through 20 degrees. It's only maybe 10 degrees, and you really want to just, use your weight, use your trim, make sure the boat's got a nice amount of heel on it. You just want to have a little bit of heel to reduce the wetted surface area. So going on to our mainsail trim, we're obviously searching for power. So we want to add depth, we want to ease the outhaul and the backstay. Ease your mainsail right out until it just starts to luff, and then trim it on a little bit. and be mindful that the vang isn't too tight. You know, in light air, you really want the leech to be responsive. Keep an eye on those top leech ribbons that we discussed about, you know, with mainsail trim, and set the vang for the conditions. As the breeze increases, you will need more vang. So, you know, be vigilant, keep your eye on the sail. You know, the Spinnaker trimmer has a job, the mainsail trimmer has a job. Keep trimming your sail, even though you're going downwind, it's not the time to get the beers out. Weight placement is as important going downwind as it is upwind. In some respects, it's more important in this light running stuff. So we want our weight forward and potentially to leeward. We're trying to keep the boat, you know, a little bit heeled over. And we, in the real light stuff, we're trying to minimise the wetted surface area and the drag. We also want to have a balanced helm. If we let the boat heel over too much, the helm will start to load up, and the helmsperson will actually have to steer the boat down to sail the course. We're trying to keep the helm pretty neutral, and we do that by moving our weight. If we've got too much helm, we put a bit more weight to windward and allow the boat to sail with less rudder angle. And you know, this photo here, you can see it's pretty light, it's a bit bumpy, and these guys have got their weight in a pretty good position. You know, a few guys up near the shrouds, down to leeward, one person on the windward side to keep that heel angle right, and one guy just holding the boom out in that light stuff. So, quick summary of what we've just talked about. We want to over-square the pole. We want the tack to be a little bit lower than the clew. Keep playing the sheet, you know, ride the luff, ride the curl. Sail the proper angle, keep the pressure in the boat and in the sail. Power up the mainsail, give it, you know, plenty of ease to make it as powerful as you can. Get the weight out of the stern. And this is probably the most important one, find more wind. You know, we can do all this, the first, you know, 7 things really well, but if we can find a bit more pressure on the race course, you know, that's where you'll really make a good game. So we're going to move into moderate air, which is it's more fun. You know, it's sailing in light air can be quite tough and frustrating. This is the nicer part of Spinnaker sailing. And so the general rules are still the same. All that's happening is we're sailing through a wider angle of wind angle. So we're still sailing the proper angle for the pressure. We're feeling the pressure in the sheet with the trimmer. The helmsperson should feel how much heel the boat has, and they can feel it in the helm as well. The helm loads up, you've got too much heel. So keep, you know, or you've got too much pressure, and you can come down a few degrees. This is a new thing that we've got to, you know, work on. As the breeze increases, what happens is the clew will naturally want to fly higher. We've got to be mindful that we don't end up with the clew too high, because we try and keep the clews even as our starting point. But if we let it go too far and we don't control what happens, the clew will just continue to go higher and higher, and the sail won't project properly. And we'll cover that in a little bit more detail in a few slides. Keep playing the sheet, keep easing the sheet till the luff curls, then trim it on. But keep pushing the boundaries, keep easing when you can, and, you know, just move that sheet all the time. As the wind increases, we steer the boat a little bit more aggressively with weight and trim. So now we're using our crew weight more. We're trying to keep the helm as neutral as we can, and we're going to be playing the main more because the angles are going to change. So in moderate winds of sort of 10 to 15 knots, the boat's almost at hull speed, not quite, but the big variable is angle. You know, in light wind, it was all about keeping the speed on the boat. Now we're trying to sail the deepest angle we can while we maintain pressure. So as the wind increases, we sail a little bit faster, but much, much deeper down towards the leeward mark. So in moderate air, we've got a much, much wider range of wind angles, from about 140 down to 160, 165. 165 is probably a little on the deep side in all honesty, but, you know, I mean, sort of 16 knots, you will get down there. So again, with our pole, we're trying to over-square the pole, but the proper pole position changes dramatically as the wind, speed and the sailing angles change. So you need to keep the guy, as the Americans call it, we call it a brace. Keep the brace moving. You know, you're going to be moving the pole a lot more as the breeze increases, so you can't keep the Spinnaker brace off and leave it. You should have someone on that all the time. You know, you're not sailing the boat with 2 or 3 people. unless you're sailing an Ettrel or an Yngling. But then, one person can often do both roles on a smaller boat like that. So keep moving the brace, keep the talk going with the crew, with the helmsperson and with the trimmer. So again, we get back to overscrewing the pole from the initial setting. So in this diagram, you can see a range of vertical lines. And what we're trying to do is, as the wind increases, each time it goes up a couple of knots, we want to get the pole back a little bit further and get that luff more vertical. So here's an example of getting the pole square. If you look at the photo on the left of the far 40, you can see the pole's forward a little bit too far. And look how round the foot of the sail is. That's just a lot of drag. We're not projecting the sail as well as we could. You can see that the luff is not flying vertically as well. So yeah, we're trying. If they flatten the pole further aft, the sail would be flatter and it'd be closer to the boat that's on the right-hand photo. And that's a pretty nice setup for those conditions. Again, we're over-squaring the pole to keep the luff vertical. And if we look at the photograph of the boat, not the diagram, you'll see that the luff is perfectly vertical and it's parallel with the mast because the boat has a slight amount of windward heel. So that's a really nice setup, and that's what we're trying to aim for in these conditions. And there's plenty of load in the Spinnaker. You can see it's pulling nicely. So they're not sailing too deep for the conditions, they're sailing a good angle there. So as much as I keep telling you to over-square the pole, keep doing it, keep pushing the boundaries, we've got to make sure we don't pull it back too far. Because what happens is then it makes the sail hard to trim because we have to over-trim the sail and we actually end up dragging the luff to leeward. And if you look at the luff of the sail, there's a slight curvature in it where the leeward sheet, the clew, is dragging the sail across the boat. And we've probably all seen this before. The pole's too far back. You can see how instead of the luff being vertical, it's actually sucking to leeward. So that's too far aft. And then the photo on the right, the pole's too far forward, and we can see that our luff isn't vertical. It's projecting out to windward. So left-hand photo too far aft, right-hand photo not far enough aft. So in moderate air, we want to steer the boat with trim and heel. When we can heel the boat to windward, it actually helps the boat sail deeper, and we can drive the boat more to leeward in the puffs and use less rudder and tiller. So with our pole height, and this is where the clew floating starts to come in. We want the tack to be slightly lower than the clew for a better shape, but as the breeze freshens, the clew tends to float up. Now, rather than raising the pole to keep those two clews even, as we've discussed, we actually square the pole back further, which means we then have to trim the Spinnaker sheet on harder, and that actually pulls the sail back and down and gives us a wider, flatter, faster, more powerful and more stable shape. So this is a good example. The photo on the left, the breeze has got up, and so what they've done is they've raised the pole to keep the two clews even. But the more they raise the pole, the more the two clews get closer together, the more they go up. So if you look at the photo on the right, they brought the pole further back. That's made the trimmer trim the sheet on harder. And now the two clews are still even, but the whole sail is projecting a lot more nicely. And this is another example. They're not the same boats. One's a J22, one's a J24, but the photo on the left, we can see, the pole is up, the two clews are even, and if you look at the luff of the head of the sail, it's actually projecting higher than horizontal. So you keep letting the pole go up, the whole sail will just go up in the air more. The photo on the right, they've got the pole aft, the clews are even, but it's a much nicer profile. This is a really good example. These are two one design boats sailing on the same day on the same patch of water. And the boat on the left has got the pole further aft. And if you look at the purple line, you can see how much higher the head and luff of the boat on the right is flying compared to the boat on the left. Then our red line shows us where the foot is on both spinnakers. Massive difference. And then the green line shows how much lower the boat on the left is flying. So, one looks really nice, one looks pretty ordinary. So, it's just a good example of how you need to keep adjusting the pole. And remember, you're trimming the sail's not trimming you. You've got to keep working at it. This is another quick example. Same boat, same day, 2 different pole heights. And you can see how the luffs are quite slack on the photo on the left, and the centre seam isn't flying as nicely. Photo on the right, pole's a little bit lower, pole's a little bit further aft, the sheet's on harder. It's a much nicer photo. So we need to sail the proper angles for speed and load in the spinnaker sheet. This is where the helmsperson and the trimmer have to work together. Over square the pole, that makes us present the sail more. It also gets the clues down a little bit. Set your pole height for the best shape you can and keep playing the sheet. Play the sheet aggressively as the wind angle changes. Now, obviously, every time you get a gust, we're trying to get the boat to drive lower. We're trying to get further downwind without taking the load out of the spinnaker sheet. Whenever you get a gust, ease the sheet, because that takes the load out of the helm, so we don't use too much rudder. And it lets the boat drive down further to leeward without losing any speed. Also, when we ease the sheet, we convert that heeling force into forward force and we push the boat forward. If we keep the sheet on, the boat heels over, the rudder loads, the boat staggers, and then we accelerate. If we give the sheet a quick ease, that helps unload everything, the boat can accelerate, and we're pushing the boat forward, not down, not sideways. So in summary, the proper angles are the big variable, and we are going to be moving the boat through big angles in these wind speeds. Over square and play the pole. Beware of that clue floating up too high when you get too deep. Keep playing the sheet to ease the load, and steer the boat with weight and trim. This video here is a really good example. It's a FAR 30. They're using their crew weight really well. The crew is low. They've got a little bit of weight to windward. The pit person is just moving out to the right because they've just made an adjustment. But what I want you to look at here is look at the tiller on the boat. The tiller is perfectly in the centre, and the helmsman is not moving the tiller at all. They're really balancing the boat well with trim and crew weight. Even the tactician is forward. They've got the boat weight out of the stern. The boat is really nice and flat. And this is an example of using your crew weight and your trim to not use too much rudder. Every time you use the rudder, you're putting on the handbrake. And so this next shot is the same boat from a different angle. And you'll see in a moment, the boat will heel to windward a little bit too much. And you'll see the 2 crews sitting near the mast and the shrouds will actually move their weight outboard to flatten the boat. Again, using crew weight so they don't use too much rudder. So here the boat heels a little bit, crew weight press out to keep the boat flatter so we're not using too much rudder. Now, this is a polished crew, but there's no reason that you and your crew can't aim to do the same thing. It's all about trying to sail the boat as well as you can. Anything you can do to make the boat faster will make your day more enjoyable. So now we're on a heavy air. This is where it all gets a bit ropey. We all get a bit scared when it's a 25 knot southerly and we've got to go around that top mark in Double Bay and go all the way up to Manly. But it can be fun if you do it well. So we sail really deep angles when the breeze is fresh. We want the pole as square as we can. We want the sail to be really flat and projected. Remember, as we ease the pole forward, the sail gets rounder. And as it gets rounder, it wants to oscillate in the breeze. We want to keep the sail flat and wide. And also, the more we bring the pole back, remember, the harder we have to sheet the sail. So if we have the sail sheeted on hard, it's flat and keeps it all choked down. We want the clues to be even. If you've got tweakers, you need the tweakers to be on. This really settles everything down. We want to play the sheet. And again, we need to use the sheet because if we get a big gust and we don't trim, we're going to load the helm up too much and we might broach. But be mindful, when we're running in a lot of wind, don't over-ease the sheet, because again, what that does is it rounds the sail up. All of a sudden, the spinnaker takes over. It's steering the boat, not the helmsperson. So we need to maintain control with trim, the course the helmsperson sails, and our weight. And it's a combination of those things that keeps us going, downwind in good shape and in control. And lastly, if you're in a boat that's light enough, try and get planing, because if you can get the boat up and planing, it takes all the load out of the boat. Everything is less loaded. You can steer the boat where you want. So if you've got a boat that will get up and boogie, try and work on getting that happening. So we want to sail deep, and even if it's not too windy, a little bit by the lee. A little bit of windward heel, again, takes the helm off the boat, so we're not using too much rudder angle. Square the pole and ease the sheet. We want to try and get the sail as square as we can, and then ease the sheet to help us sail deeper. If the sail's strapped on too hard, we'll start to load the rudder up too much. If you start to lose control because it's getting a bit windy and you might be a little bit on the square side, come up a few degrees, get the boat back into a nice, comfortable position. Get a little bit of leeward heel. Now, if the boat's heeling too much to windward, it gets a bit scary. You might go the wrong way in Chinese jibe. So bring the boat up, settle it down, don't over-ease the sheet, trim it all on a bit, get the boat settled, and then when you're settled again and the breeze dies a bit, go back to sailing deep. Don't be scared to put the bow up 5 or 10 degrees for a couple of minutes to get your feet back on the ground. It's better than a big tip out, because that's no good for anyone, except us. Maybe you'll blow your spinnaker up. So with our pole position, we want it to be well aft. You can even get dead square, like perpendicular to the centre line. If you can get it that deep, that's great. We want a really vertical luff profile. We want to create a wide, flat shape, and then ease the main all the way out. Because if we have the pole back and we have the main on, we don't have even weight distribution on both sails. Also, the spinnaker is generally, nowadays much bigger than the mainsail. Most boats are carrying masthead spinnakers now. So we want to ease the main out and have enough vang on that we've got plenty of load in the leach of the mainsail, because if we let the vang off, all of a sudden there's more load in the spinnaker and it makes the boat harder to steer. But be mindful, when I say ease the main all the way out, we do not want the boom laying against the shrouds, because that's how you'll end up bending or breaking your boom. So ease it all the way out. I even get people to go and check that the boom is not touching the shrouds. This is even more important if you've got a carbon boom, because if you've got a carbon fibre boom, you'll bend it around the leeward shrouds and break it. So just be mindful of that. Okay, if we look at our diagrams here with our pole position, in the left-hand photo, we can see the pole is forward, sail's quite round and deep. Right-hand side, I know I'm going over old ground. Pole further back, flatter shape, it keeps us in control in heavy air. Okay, so this photo here, this is an ID35, an American design. The pole is probably a little bit too far forward in this photo. They could really get it a little bit further off, because you can see, if you look at the clue, you can see the clue is projecting out to windward. It's not flying close to vertical. You can ease the clue all the way out to the headstay, to the forestay in these conditions, but don't go past it. Otherwise, you're putting too much load on the windward side of the boat. If you're somewhere near the forestay, that's fine. And then use weight to balance the helm. So you can see here the boat's got a little bit of weather helm. They seem to be in control, but it's pretty marginal. If they've got a big gust there, you might find that all of a sudden the tiller's pushed the other way, trying to keep the boat going straight. But all in all, not bad. It could just be a little bit further off that pole. So with our pole height, again, remember, the clues tend to float high when we're running and reaching in fresh breeze. So keep that pole aft. The entire sail flies too high and the head ends up being horizontal, like in those photos that we looked at earlier with the pole too high. Square the pole back and keep it down, and keep the sheet trimmed on to keep a vertical profile. This little animation here just illustrates what happens. Look at the shape of the sail as the pole goes forward. What happens is the pole goes up, the clues go up, all of a sudden we've got this big round shape that's starting to oscillate the spinnaker. and the spinnaker starts to drive the boat instead of the helmsperson. So we just want to always be mindful of keeping that spinnaker low, keep the clues as low as you can, keep it flat in terms of its shape. Sheet trim. We need to ease to a curl or ease the clue to the forestay, but no further. Don't forget, over easing the spinnaker makes the sail deep and unstable, and then the boat starts to roll around, which is the last thing we want to do. If there's no curl, you might be able to square the pole a little bit further. So just keep trying, keep adjusting, keep moving things around, see if you can square that pole a little bit. If you're as square as you can get it, just have to sail with what you've got. And remember that the wind flows across the sail and vertically through the sail. So we need to have the sail flat and a nice sectional shape in the centre. Okay, this is an animation of a Colgate 26. The pole's a little bit too far forward. You can see how round the foot of the spinnaker is. Starting to roll around. It doesn't help having that guy standing at the mast, but you can see here, the spinnaker is really driving the boat. And if you look at this one, it gets really ropey as the spinnaker starts putting the boat towards the Chinese giant. The tiller's hard over, they're so square, the spinnaker's collapsed by the leech. But what I want you to look at too is when we get side on, look how twisted the mainsail is. There's not enough boom vang on here, and that boom vang gives us enough, gives us power in the mainsail to balance the boat. We need to balance the boat. We don't need to have too much power on the spinnaker side and not enough power on the mainsail side. Be a long afternoon on that boat, I reckon. It looks pretty uncomfortable. Okay, when it gets really heavy, control is our big concern. We need to choke the spinnaker down, get it flat, wide, really need to keep everything in check and under control. You need to head up a few degrees to control the rolling, because if you sail too square when it gets really windy, we've all had it where you can't go down the harbour, it's all good, and then you get a 5-knot increase in pressure. That's when you need to just put the bow up a few degrees, settle the boat down, get it all back in control. Don't let the roll get out of control. And then if you do broach, hang on. That's the most important thing. Make sure that everyone's safe on board and no one goes overboard. Yep, the sails were flat, but that doesn't matter. Just be careful, safety first. So a couple of photos here. This is a really good example of a J35 in pretty fresh conditions with reasonable sized waves. They've got the pole well aft, the mainsail's eased, they've got their crew on the rail, keeping the boat nice and flat, and they look really comfortable and in control. This one, not so much. We can see here that the pole is a little bit too far forward. You can see the clues have both raised up. The sail is really round and the boat's got a fair bit of weather heel on it. The crew are leeward trying to keep the boat flat. And the boat that we looked at in the previous photo is that one in the distance, the red spinnaker with the white flash in it. So, same boats, same day, but you can see the difference in how the spinnaker shape affects how we steer. Again, this is an example of, they're doing it all pretty well. The pole looks well aft, but all that load in the spinnaker is driving the boat, to weather. So in a situation like this, I would trim the spinnaker on a bit harder. We've got a little bit of roll on the luff, trim on harder, bring the bow up a few degrees, try to get the boat a little bit more vertical in terms of its, mast plane. This photo here, again, it's another J35. The boat looks comfortable. It's flat. The crew weight's evenly distributed. And all that pressure in the spinnaker is pushing the boat forward. It's not heeling it to windward. It's not making the helmsperson use too much rudder. It just looks like a boat that's really nicely set up and sailing well. So this animation really, just again, I keep highlighting the same things. As the pole goes forward, the clues go up, the foot gets round. All of a sudden, everything starts rolling, and we've all been here. It's not good. Same result. So we're trying to keep the spinnaker flat, trying to keep it projected, keep everything under control, stop the rolling. You know, we don't want a big round parachute up there driving us all over the ocean. We want to be in control of our destiny. So don't let the pole go forward. Keep it all tight. Keep it all in control. And, you know, make sure that you're sailing the boat as well as you can. This is one last animation. Same animation, just shows it from on board. Pole goes forward, clue goes up. Here we go. So now that's what we're trying to avoid. That's why we keep wanting to adjust our sails. Now, this is what it looks like in real life. This guy's got a little bit too square. Look at the boat, it's kicking all over the place. If they'd just come up 5 degrees earlier and trimmed on a bit harder, you know, all that could have been caught really quickly and put back in check. Don't be scared. If you start to get too square and the Spinnaker takes over, trim on, come up, get settled again. And this one here, I just want you to really watch. As the pole goes forward, look at what happens. The pole starts getting these forward, Spinnaker goes up, too deep. And now the Spinnaker is driving the boat. The wheel is there to go. And everyone's heads down, hang on. So, quite a good example. Now, the boat was probably on the edge anyway. As soon as that pole went forward, you can see the Spinnaker get deeper. You can see the boat start to roll. So, yes, keep everything flat, keep it under control. It'll make your Saturday afternoon a lot more enjoyable. Okay, so that's running trim. The reaching trim is a little bit simpler. We don't have as many dynamics. So reaching trim in light air, now our crew isn't hiking. What we want to do though is we want to have the pole off the forestay. And the reason we do that is if we have the pole on the headstay, a couple of things happen. First of all, you could bend or break your pole. That's not good. But secondly, the more important one is if our pole is on the forestay, our tack is actually to leeward of the forestay. We never want the tack to be to leeward of the forestay. So have the pole back a little bit, just so your tack is always just slightly to windward of the forestay. We want to get the pole down so that we can match the clue height, or in light air, we want it a little bit low so we actually get a little bit more twist in the sail. We need to sail up and down in the breeze. Just because we're reaching, the same control things with the trimmer and the helmsperson, that interaction and communication is still the same. If the boat gets too light and stands up, you've got to come up. Don't worry about where the leeward mark is. You've got to sail with the pressure. You can't just aim at the mark. Keep playing the sheet and maintain the pressure and talk to the person who's driving about the pressure you're feeling. And look, on a typical boat, you know, the trimmer will be saying, I've got good pressure now, come down 5 degrees, yeah, that's good, no lower, keep that, oh, I'm getting a bit lighter, come up 2, yeah, that's good, no hotter, you know, keep sailing that angle, got a little bit more pressure now, let's come down 3 degrees, and you just keep moving the tiller and moving the boat and maintaining that close to constant pressure as you can. And trim the main, you know, it's a good source of power. We don't want to have the mainsail under trimmed, but also, you know, we've got to keep it flowing, don't over trim it. So again, we want to maintain the pressure and the speed. This is really critical in light air. So this is a little, it's a Caribbean version of a J24. They've got a big open cockpit in light air. And if you look, you can see that the clue is slightly lower than the tack. Now, if they just lowered the pole a little bit, that would get the clue up a little bit more and get a little bit more twist in the leech, because you can see how close the leech of the Spinnaker is here. So just keep working on that pole height being correct for the conditions. This is another example, just a photo of a boat reaching light air. Again, you can see the clue is slightly lower than the tack. Slightly lower pole would just help twist that Spinnaker a little bit and open the leech. So when we get to moderate air with the crew fully hiked, again, pole off the headstay, keep the pole slightly low to open the leech, steer up and down with the pressure. When you got good pressure, take it down, play the sheet, keep adjusting the sheet all the time. When you get a gust, ease the sheet to turn that heeling force into forward force. Don't just keep it strapped on, because the boat will just heel over. Everything will load up, and eventually you'll have to ease the sheet anyway. If you do it initially, it just turns that heeling force into forward force, and you start accelerating. And keep trimming the mainsail. So as I said, convert the heeling force into speed. Ease whenever you get a puff, and just, then you can always retrim. And you will have to retrim once the boat's accelerated and the apparent goes forward. So this is a nice photo of, it looks like an older IMS boat sailing in, moderate air. Crew weight looks pretty good. Could be a little bit further forward. If you look at the knuckle of the bow, it's just slightly out, but it looks pretty nice. This is the same Caribbean boat I was talking about, and here they are. They're just trimming away as the breeze increases. There's a little header. On comes the Spinnaker. See here, the mainsail actually starts flapping because the mainsail trimmer is a little bit behind the Spinnaker trimmer. But just keep easing the sheet. Don't be scared to make big adjustments. It's all about keeping the pressure in the boat. See, they're trimming back on now as the boat stands up. What they should have done there is the trimmer should have actually said, I'm a bit light now, bring the bow up 5 or maybe 3. Keep the constant heel. You don't want to be heel to windward, heel to leeward. You want to keep the pressure constant. Try and angle, keep that same angle of heel. That's the key, is we're trying to keep constant weight in the boat and in the helm and the sheet. When we're overpowered, this is where it gets a little bit dicey. Again, pole off the headstay. Don't let that tack creep to leeward. As much as you're not laying the mark and you're overpressed and you're panicking, getting that tack to leeward of the forestay is not doing you any favours. So just always have the pole slightly after the forestay. Keep the pole down to open the leech. We're trying to twist the Spinnaker more. Ease it when you load everything up. So when you get a gust or you're overpowered, don't be scared to ease the sheet. And if the helmsperson has to come down, they have to come down, but you can't, it's no point tipping the boat over. You've just got to ease the sheet to unload the helm and then trim back on. Dump the vang and the main as you need to. So, if you're really getting a little bit overpowered, don't be scared to ease the vang early. It's better to have the mainsail slightly ragging and in control, because also if you ease the main and then you go for the vang, the damage is probably already done. You've got so much heel on at that point. Dumping the vang at the last minute, it's almost too late. Get your crew to hike harder. Hiking matters downwind as well as upwind. The more weight you can get out on the side, the more you can pressure up the boat, and it might keep you on track for the mark. And if you're in a boat that can plane, try and get the thing planing, because it will unload everything. So here is a boat that's in pretty nice trim. Everything looks good. See, the pole is off the headstay. Nice trim. Spinnaker trim is up near the shrouds. It's a little bit old school. I like to trim for a little bit further aft so I can talk to the person who's helming, and no point being 15 feet away from them. The crew, though, they could probably do a better job of getting their weight out. Why they're all sitting on the coach roof with their legs in is beyond me. But just it's a bit of a constructive comment. So very heavy air reaching. We want to control the helm load. So all the same basic principles apply. It sounds pretty repetitive, but if you keep doing the same stuff well, you'll get around the course faster. Pole off the headstay, pole down to open the leech. Make sure you keep the helm load down so you don't tip out or use too much rudder. Dump the vang and the main as needed. Hike even harder, get more weight out. And don't get transfixed on sailing at the mark. If you have to sail lower, sail lower. As we all know, there's a good chance if you come down 10 degrees in that big gust, there'll be a lull. Use the lull to come back up again. Don't just aim at the mark and keep broaching down the harbour. Sail low, wait for a lull. If the lull doesn't come, then you have to put the jib back up or the genoa back up and take the Spinnaker down. But don't just be stuck, I've got to get to the mark, because you probably won't get there and you'll end up just broaching. So sail to the angle and the course that you can, given the conditions. So broach prevention, which is important in these conditions. Ease the Spinnaker sheet when the boat heels. Even if you have a curl, ease it more. Saying I've got perfect trim doesn't matter when the boom's in the water and you've spun out. just keep easing, keep talking to the helms person. Ask them how their helm is. I'm sure they're going to be telling you anyway, but don't be scared to ask. Dump the vang in the main sheet. Have the mainsail flapping. It doesn't matter. If the rudder starts to stall, there are two things you can do. One, if you've got a tiller, give the tiller a quick pump, or give the wheel a quick wiggle. But the other thing is, if your rudder starts to stall, don't just hold your helm hard over and hope that something's going to change. It won't. At that point, there's no water going around the rudder. It's completely stalled. It's counterintuitive. It's hard to do. But what you need to do is straighten the tiller or straighten the rudder. Even for a couple of seconds, let the water flow around the rudder again, and then turn the boat down. I've been on plenty of boats where the helmsman's there screaming at everyone with their helm hard over. Nothing changes till they straighten the rudder. So it's pretty hard when you're about to do a Chinese job to straighten the rudder, but it's better than the alternative. So just be mindful of how much rudder angle you've got, and steer, do what you can to steer out of it. Get the crew to hike even harder. Arms and legs out, the whole lot. As I said earlier, sail a little lower and hope the breeze fades or lightens. But sail the right angle for the conditions. And if you have to put a jib on, you have to put a jib on. But as we all know, you get a big gust, maybe 5 minutes later, you'll get a lull. That might get you halfway back to the mark. But sail until you get to the point where you can't lay, and then you just have to do the right thing. When you've done all that and it still isn't enough, and you do round up or broach, hang on, ease the Spinnaker sheet, dump the vang in the main sheet. And when you stand up again, you've got to turn below the proper course so you can retrim. If you just aim at the mark, you'll just trim and trim and trim and then tip over again. Sail low, get the boat going, and then slowly come up with the crew hiking as hard as they can. It's all pretty straightforward. It's all stuff that we know we should do, but we've all been out there and done it ourselves or seen someone do it. So, they're the real tricks. So the summary is, play the sheet to the load and ease when you've got too much load. Keep the leach open with a low pole. Unload the helm to accelerate. Up in the lulls, down in the puffs. Ease your main to keep the telltales flowing. And this is an overall trim thing, not for heavy air. Set the vang to match the twist to the flow, and work out when it's better to change to a jib. Don't fight it and fight it. Make that decision early enough, and then and that's it. So that's the end of our presentation. So I believe we've got a few questions, Albie. Sorry, I didn't have you there for a sec, mate. Can you repeat the question?
Just said to unmute myself. Sorry. No one's put any questions through yet, so feel free to type in some questions, guys, in the chat, and we'll get them answered for you. A couple of points I had. You spoke about the in the light air trimming the sheet load. Yep. I mean, the biggest tip I got when I was first starting out, I had the great pleasure to sail with Graham Frizzle Freeman on a boat and did a Hobart with him. And he's one of his big tips, which has stuck with me forever, was always make sure you've got a minimum of 5 kilograms on the Spinnaker sheet pulling against you. Yeah, and that was a huge. Once he told me that was a huge tip. Okay,
and I guess being able to quantify it some way, makes it easier, because otherwise it's how much is enough, how much is too much. So that's a really good tip. Great tip from one of the great sailors. Yep.
One from Terry. When do we use the tweakers?
Look.
When do we use the speed brake?
Look, to be honest, Terry, I pretty well only use the tweakers when I'm square running and there's enough pressure that we're just trying to keep the boat settled. As I kept saying, we're trying to get the sail flat. We don't want the clue to be rising too much. But yeah, like Albie said, they are a handbrake. With a Spinnaker, as opposed to an asymmetric sail, we've got the luff and the leach are the same shape. So we need to do everything we can to make the flow as effective as possible. Pulling the tweaker on unnecessarily just closes the leach. So I really only use the tweakers in moderate to fresh air when I'm square running.
One thing I'd just like to add there, we see a lot of people like to pull their tweaker on when their Spinnaker sheet's rubbing on the boom. Don't try to avoid this at all costs if you can, because what it does, it pulls the clue of the sail inboard to the gunnel of the boat, which does the effects of rounds up the bottom of the sail so it doesn't project, makes the sail deeper. If you're worried about the sheet chafing on the boom, just make sure your boom's nice and smooth so the sheet doesn't chafe on it.
Yeah, and look, the other thing too, Albie, that's a good point. You know, if that is an issue, there's plenty of self-adhesive tapes that are available now that you can buy at Whitworths or Chowdhury's that are designed to do just that. They're chafing tapes. We don't see it a lot on aluminium spars, but maybe if you've got a painted aluminium boom and you've just paid a whole lot of money to make it look nice, you don't want it to get scratched or gouged out, put some tape on, make a note of where it's rubbing. And look, racing boats have been doing this for years on their carbon fibre booms. A lot of them have a Kevlar chafe patch just for that reason, because the Spinnaker sheet does chafe, particularly when you're pressed. So, but Albie makes a good point. The worst thing is to have a sharp object that you end up chafing the sheet. Also, you get a lot more drag, and that makes it harder to trim.
Yeah. Okay, a question from Rob. Almost all situations where over squaring pole and lower the pole, what situation would you have the pole further forward and or the tack higher?
Well, look, you know, it all depends on the angle. If we're trying to sail square, the first section was about running. And so running is all about getting down to the leeward mark, whether you're doing a windward leeward race or whether you're doing a Saturday squadron race in a nor'easter and you're trying to get back down the harbour from Manly. You know, we're trying to sail the correct angle for the wind strength. And the key in all this is it's about how much pressure we've got in the sheet. Let's aim for the 5 kilo mark. But, you know, it's about trying to sail the angle. If you're sailing around the harbour and you need to have the pole halfway between the forestay and the shroud because it's just a broad reach, well, set your pole to that angle because that is the right position for the course. In terms of pole height, generally, if you use a rule of thumb that the clues are even, that's fine. But it doesn't do you any harm at all to have the tack slightly lower than the clue. And I'm only talking a tiny amount because just remember, this is not a Jenica, it's a symmetrical sail. And so there's so much return on the leach when we're sheeted on. You know, we're trying to get the wind to flow across the sail. We're not blowing it, it's not a square rigger, we're not getting blown around the world. We need the flow to go across the sail. And if you think back to that the video we had of the little 24-footer tight reaching in light air, you can see how closed the leach is. And that's what our Spinnaker looks like. That's the shape of it all the time. So the more we can do to keep the leaches open, the better.
So in summary, there wouldn't be any real situation where you'd have the tack higher than the clue. It's either equal or the tack's lower.
Yeah, exactly. You know, I mean, being slightly lower doesn't do you any harm at all because, you know, we're trying to keep that leach open and flowing.
Okay. Another question from Andrew. In the photos, the poles are often not parallel to the water. Is that important?
Yeah, look, it is. I mean, look, in some of the photos, particularly there was one where there was a boat square running and on the ID35. They are a bit unique. They have an end-for-end pole system. They don't do dip pole jibing, and they just have a ring on the mast. You can't adjust it. In a perfect world, if you've got an adjustable track on your mast for your pole, trying to get the pole completely horizontal or parallel with the water is really important because obviously the more horizontal, the longer the projected length of the pole, and that helps us flatten the foot, get that luff vertical. So yeah, if you've got an adjustable system, yeah, move the butt up, but don't forget we need to get the pole back so we can flatten the sail. You know, we don't want to be like the photo of the boat where the pole was forward and the clues were up in the air, we want to, drag that clue down as best we can with our pole position, and then set the pole parallel. And on racing boats, if the breeze drops and we lower the pole a bit, we'll actually lower it at both ends. So don't be scared to move it as the topping lift changes. Change your mast position as well if you have that system.
Yep. Okay. One from Ed. In running square, at what point do you change from windward heel to leeward heel, or vice versa?
Yeah, good question, Ed. Look, I think the key thing, and if you look at the video of the Far 30 with the green Spinnaker, it's all about helm load. And we're going to cover a little bit more of that when we talk about asymmetrics next week. But we're trying to use the minimum amount of helm. So if the boat wants, has, for want of a correct term, weather helm, and it's trying to turn up into the breeze, and we've got to pull the tiller towards us to keep it going where we want to go, we need more weight to windward to keep the boat flatter. If the breeze gets up and all of a sudden the boat keeps diving to leeward because you've got too much weather helm, or too much weather heel, and you're pushing the tiller away from you or turning the wheel, to keep the boat going straight, then you need to flatten the boat a bit, get a bit more weight on the leeward side. So use the helm as your guide. If you're rounding up, heel the boat more to windward. If the boat's trying to jibe or drive too low, then you've got too much weather helm for those conditions. Get a bit of weight to leeward. And keep it low, keep the weight low, that's the key.
Okay, probably last question here. It's a relevant one from John. If you have trouble with the luff collapsing and it's hard to adjust the pole, can you use the tweaker to load up the Spinnaker and keep the luff from collapsing?
Good question. No.
The speed brake.
In case I wasn't clear. No. Look, I think we've all been in that position, and it's particularly the case when you're sailing. You're doing a Satellite race, you're sailing between the heads. There's a leftover southerly swell, you're in a nor'easter, the boat's bouncing around. What you need to do there is lower the pole to get the luff to be firmer. So what we're trying to do is get the luff straighter. So if we ease the topping lift down, if we've got an adjustable track on the mast, lower it at the mast end, and just get that luff to be a little firmer. If we sail around with the pole too high, if you think back to the photo of the same boat with the grey and black and white Spinnaker, the photo on the left, the pole was really high and you could see how loose the luff was and how unstable the sail looked. If it's doing that, lower the pole so you actually get the luff a little bit firmer, and then you've got an easier sail to trim. You'll find you're using less sheet. And the other thing is you need, and I think one of the other key things here is, in that situation, you don't have enough pressure in the sheet. So you need to sail a little higher to load the Spinnaker up and get the boat sailing. And then when you get that pressure from the trimmer, you can come down a couple of degrees. So if you're in bumpy water, you do have to sail higher. You need to keep the pressure in the sail.
We might wrap it up at Andrew. Thank you very much, Andrew and Albie, for taking the time out with us this afternoon. There was an awful lot of good information there, and if you want to listen to it again, we will actually have this session up on the Squadron's YouTube channel later on this afternoon, and you all know about this because you're receiving our Squadron newsletters, and we'll have a link in that when the next newsletter comes out as well. So those of you that if we didn't get to your questions this week, I'll certainly put it on notice, Andrew. We want to know about actually getting the thing down again in heavy breeze. Got any tips for that? So, but I know we need to follow that up with the well, it doesn't matter. Whenever the scary sails out, you'll work out how to pull it down. So
yeah, I got a message from Terry Daly last week. If we're going to talk about different types of manoeuvres, I said we're just talking about trimming. We're just sail makers. We can probably touch on that in the future, but yeah, we'll just help you get to that leeward mark quicker. Then you've got to get the thing down yourself.
Wonderful. All right. No, thanks again, Albie and Andrew, for just this afternoon. Thanks everybody else for tuning in, and we'll look forward to talking about asymmetrical Spinnakers next week.
Thanks
everyone.
See you next
Thanks.
week. Have a great week.
Great.